Hey everyone, my name is Elio. I'm the co-founder and CEO at ScaleStack, and welcome to the Revenue Engine Masters podcast. We dive deep into go-to-market, sales ops, and cutting-edge ways in which we are transforming the way go-to-market is done today. And I'm joined today by Remy Piazza, principal and CRO at Powerhouse Consulting Team. He's a seasoned chief revenue officer with 25 plus years of experience leading, technology. I know it's hard for me as well to admit the length of the experience, but always in, companies like able to grow faster. And he now helps CEOs and founders scale revenues through his consulting firm, Powerhouse. You've had lots of different experiences in a lot of different industries. First of all, Remy, welcome to the podcast. Anything that you want to add to the intro? Any highlight that you think we should make sure that people know about you?
No. I think that's good, Elio. I
Very
would,
good.
yeah, I think that's perfect. Yeah.
And you are like of Italian descent. I'm Italian originally, so we talked a
Yes.
lot about Italy and maybe
Yeah.
moving there someday.
Maybe, man. Maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But I'm always curious about how did we get here? So if you want to tell us a little bit about your journey, I mean, you've done telecom, fintech, now you're doing consulting. What's been like, first of all, like the common thread that you can identify across all the different experiences, and what sort of like prepared you for this moment about what you're doing right now?
Yeah. Yeah. I've always had a really insatiable level of curiosity. It's something that's always, that's just part of my personality. I think I started my career off at Xerox, which is really, I would call the godfather of solution selling. They
Yeah.
were selling very, commodities, back in the 70s, 80s, 90s up till today in a very, value added way. And when I joined them, what amazed me is they started with the customer first and said, what problem is your customer trying to solve? And then re-engineered it backwards to create a sales process. And of course, the way that they did that was a differentiator, right? As opposed to just talking about features and functionality. They taught that the solution selling was actually a differentiator in a very commoditized industry. But it also taught me that it's not about what you sell, it's about the problem that you're trying to solve for your customer. And I thought, wow, that's like, for me, that was mind blowing. And so I was lucky enough to get um, connected with a senior rep who was
Like
just,
zeros.
yeah, so exceptionally good at the discovery part of the call. And so I
Mm.
became fascinated with discovery. Just and I saw him operate when we went on joint calls, and I just thought he was a wizard. I said, "Michael, you have to teach me that." And he would spend a lot of time with me, and I learned to, you know, perfect as best I could. It's something you need to keep working on, like anything. But I really wanted to become a student, a master of discovery, and it helped with my curiosity. And I love learning about customers. And I guess one of the reasons why I've jumped, industries is because, first of all, somebody said to me early on in my career, you really need to pick an industry and go deep. And I just thought that sounds incredibly boring to me. I have no desire to do that. So I wanted to learn about different industries. I wanted to learn about the technology. I wanted to learn how they did business. And so I moved around, and I think it made me a better leader, and it made me a better CRO as well, because I could take different things from different industries, right? And create new ways of going to market, create new ways of dealing with issues. So for
Yeah.
me, it was always about learning. And I think what I really love is building systems that really help turn chaos into growth. That's what it's all about for me, turning the chaos into systems. And that's what I love.
Wow, so much stuff, Remy. First of all, I didn't know you started your career at Xerox. I missed that in the prep for this.
That's okay.
And and obviously Xerox, I mean, like amazing company. I mean, Apple, you obviously know the story about like Steve Jobs touring Xerox Park, where like, the mouse was invented and the
Yeah.
graphic interface like was invented and so many other things. And it's fascinating that you say like they essentially work backwards from the customer problem to identify a solution. And so it's crazy to see that they sort of missed so many innovative ideas that they had in their like backyard, really, at park, and other people like Apple took them to market. And when you were talking about like the working backwards, I worked at Amazon for a portion of my career. And that's basically what Amazon, is obsessed with. No? So like, the customer obsession is really, let's first understand like what is the customer need and work backwards from that to retrace the steps that are needed to deliver that experience. And so the product, the service, et cetera, et cetera. And so first question or sub questions about Xerox, where do you think that they lost? If this was such a strong culture when, you join as early in your career, where do you think that they lost the market? Xerox,
Yeah.
I mean.
I don't know. It's a good question. Honestly, Elio, I don't know if I really know. I guess, maybe they got to a point where, when you become a public company, you start working for shareholders and quarterly dividends and profits, and maybe some of that, innovation and some of that risk taking starts to get curbed, and then eventually,
Yeah.
so maybe that's it, but I really don't know, but,
Or maybe this huge business that they had, like they went into autopilot. And so it was very difficult for new businesses to grow
yeah,
because there was this like crazy profitable business that like, you know,
yeah,
went on its own.
yeah,
And so like any new idea had to be confronted with the reality of like such a huge business that like, huge
yeah,
project profit margins and stuff. The
yeah,
other thing that you say, like super interesting, is the discovery. I love the discovery process as well. And I think you said like the curiosity, right? So I feel that if you're not curious in this job, like, you shouldn't do this job at all. Meaning like
yeah,
go to market. I think go to
yeah,
market requires like curiosity as probably the most important element. You need to care about your customers. You need to be curious about them. You need to be able to like ask the questions that will bring you closer to understand their reality. And then you can insert or try to insert in that reality to see how you can help. And so in that discovery, what are like the key questions that, even in a first call, you try to get out of like a prospect or a customer? What are the things that you absolutely need to, you know, have a good understanding by the end, like you have a first interaction with a prospect?
yeah, I mean, in the back of my head, I'm always wondering why we're here, or how, to your like you opened up with a great question, which is why are we here? That's a great question. Like, so what led you to want to
Hmm.
meet with us today, right? What's and then start there. And then it's not always that difficult as far as, so what's working, right? What's not working? Um if if you had an amazing quarter, what would you be high-fiving the team about at the end of the
Hmm.
quarter? Things like just first of all, they've got to be open-ended questions. I mean, one of the first things that I noticed when I started my career, and usually that you notice with newer salespeople, is they ask a lot of closed-ended questions, right? And what I mean is you get a lot of yes, no's. So, do you like the color blue? Yes, no, right? Instead of asking something open-ended, like, tell me about, right? Those kind of questions. Those are conversational because you want the customer to do 80% of the talking. And so I would always aim for that 80/20 rule where they were and that was drilled into my head really early on, was make sure that you're asking open-ended questions so the customer's doing 80% of the talking. And part of that's not just about getting the information, it's also about making the customer feel heard, right? And you know what that's like when you walk out of a meeting where or an interaction where you felt heard. Um, I mean, that's a good feeling, right? And so, even when you're at a networking event, you say, I really like this person, Elio, right? And they're like, Elio, what does he do? And you're like, I don't even know. I just know, I just know he's a really great person. It's probably because you wanted to you were curious about me and you asked all these questions about me. I had an opportunity to tell you about myself, and I felt like I was heard. So it wasn't just getting information, but it was more about building a relationship with that person and making them feel heard.
And I love the point about the open-ended questions. They seem like fluffy and like you almost like I've seen like maybe less experienced reps being like almost afraid of asking those open-ended questions. Also because once you ask that question, you have to listen and you sort of have to adapt what you say after that based on that. You can't just ask the question and not do anything with what they've just told you,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah, and when I worked at Career Builder years ago, we called it digging deeper. And so or peel back the onion, right? We talked a lot about peeling back the onion. These are some pretty dated concepts, but they still matter today.
yeah.
With all the tech that we have today, these things still matter. They're always going to matter. And so, when to your point about when you ask an open-ended question, and when I was, a more junior rep, you'd almost have like this brain blockage where you didn't know where to take the conversation next. I think that's where the experience and some of the maturity comes from, is you 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 can start to ask follow-up questions, secondary level and even tertiary level questions to really help unpack the pain, right? And to me, that's where the magic really happens, is when you start to ask those second and third level questions. All the really juicy stuff comes out then. And that takes, that takes practice, it takes training. But and I think no matter what technology you've got in place today, I don't think that can be replaced. I don't. And for two reasons. One is selling is still very human, right? So you still need to, whether you're doing it over Zoom or whether you're doing it in person, selling is an emotional thing. It's not just a logical thing. And so it's a people thing. And because it's a people thing, people are going to still buy from people that they trust. And to me, trust has two elements. Element one is, are you a good person, right? Are you ethical? Are you moral? Two is, are you credible? Meaning, do you know what you're doing? Are you equipped or skilled to provide me with a solution? And these are still very human things. And so selling, regardless of how much AI we have or what the technology is, will always be very human, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah. The secondary and tertiary like questions are so important. I agree. I learned this deeply at Amazon again, not so much in selling, but in hiring. Amazon is
Yes.
crazy about hiring, right?
Yeah.
And so I became a bar raiser while there. So I'm passionate about hiring and stuff. And one of the things that you have to do is really like, if you get an answer, like, don't be satisfied. Like, okay, like, yes, I increased revenues by 30% on my prior company and like, beat my quota. And so then, okay, what was your quota? And so what about your others? What about like, your peers? And then like, what did you think worked? What didn't work? And like, what did you learn? Blah, blah. So go level deeper in order to get to the truth or as close to the truth as it's possible and feasible.
Yeah.
Really
Yeah.
interesting stuff. Uh,
Yeah.
I want to move to the next subject, but like last question about this, like, so curiosity for sure. What other trait you think is really indispensable do this job?
With GTM,
Yes.
think I think for me, pattern recognition or spotting growth levers that others miss is really like pattern recognition is really key, right? Like, and I talked about this in one of my posts. There's two types of knowledge. There's fluid knowledge and there's crystallized knowledge. Fluid knowledge is more, you know, 1 + 1 = 2. It's about how fast you respond. It's things like that. Crystallized knowledge is usually built over time, and you start to recognize patterns, and and it gives you the ability to see 3 steps ahead before somebody even knows what's coming at
Mm.
them. I mean, I think that a lot of that's based in experience. It doesn't always necessarily equate to, I'll call it age, but sometimes it does. But it's pattern recognition, and I think that's really underplayed is pattern recognition, and you still need to execute relentlessly. Um, but I still think that, moving fast is important from idea to action, of course, but pattern recognition is really critical. It'll you'll be able to pinpoint opportunities and avoid landmines when you can exercise that kind of pattern recognition. And that's something that you don't always hear a lot about. But it's critical, especially in leadership roles. It's
It's
critical.
a very sophisticated thing, and I think it's combination of things. Which again, like I think you are. It's interesting what you say because like you cannot do anything of this well unless you develop it over time. So, like what you just said about pattern recognition to me is like, okay, you need to look around corners. And so, like, to do that, you need to be curious to, like, analyze like what worked, what didn't work, and try to like see, around the corner. Or also, like, trying being right. I think that this is we often forget that like success is typically that like we always make mistakes, but you want to be more right than wrong. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
the ability to over time improve on that, it's very important. And like to develop the judgment that is required to be more right than wrong. Over time, I made plenty of mistakes, but I certainly could not have done Scale Stack without those mistakes and having learned. We have this saying in Italian, which is errare è umano, perseverare diabolico, which really means like, you can make mistakes. That's very human. But if you do the same mistakes all the time, that's,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
evil.
Right.
Like
Right. Right.
you
Right.
have to learn from the mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. No question. Yeah. Yeah.
So pattern recognition, absolutely crucial. Very good. Remy, let's maybe, we went from a very philosophical start to maybe I want to go to something directly, not that it wasn't useful, but actually very useful, but directly applicable to what people that may listen to this are thinking about it. And so before we started recording, we talked about silos, silos between sales, marketing, and customer success. And you have seen this develop at many companies, no? And you were starting to tell me about like how do you try to solve for those problems. And so the question is really like 2 steps. First is like, how do you think that these silos are created? And the second is like, how do you solve for that so that people start collaborating more?
Yeah. So it's that cross-functional go-to-market that everybody's looking to achieve, right? So yeah, the question is, yeah. How do you break down silos across the revenue team, which for me are sales, marketing, customer success, right? I think for me, you've got to start with one shared revenue number, and you have to put vanity metrics aside, right? So some people think that we'll use something like, I don't know, Facebook likes or LinkedIn likes, right? Those are vanity metrics, right? So I think everyone needs to start by being evaluated with that revenue number, regardless of where you sit within the organization. I think that's one. I think you've also got to really, I call it maybe not force, but in some cases, you really have to force joint planning, right? Like everyone defines the ICP the same. Everyone's following the same buyer journey map, and you've got a shared accountability. That's number two. And that's got to be in the planning stages. I think three is just unifying metrics, right? Like things like paying attention to the big metrics that we should all be evaluated on. Each department's going to have metrics that they're separately like they're going to evaluate themselves on. But I think at a unified go-to-market level, you need to look at things like revenue. You need to look at things like maybe CAC payback, right?
Hmm.
You need to
Hmm.
look at things like net revenue retention, maybe things like pipeline coverage versus target. You've got to pick and you've got to dashboard those and review them as a GTM team at whatever cadence. Could be weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever the cadence is. But you've got to pick some unifying metrics that the entire GTM team is evaluated on, regardless of where they sit in the organization. So if I had to sum, it's really start with one shared number, leave the vanity metrics alone over here. Um, you really got to force the joint planning, making sure that basics like ICP, customer journey, those things are, everyone defines those things the same. And then make sure that you've got some sort of GTM dashboard, and you've got some unifying metrics, things like NRR, CAC, ARR. Things, those are just some examples. There's others, but those are the three things that I would really focus on.
And when do you start seeing the magic? What type of like maybe executive? I mean, like you work with lots of companies and executives at this company. So where do you start seeing like the magic happen? What do you want to look for? Like that they talk about customers, they like, like they maybe like are changing the way they present to each other what they have been doing, or where do you start to see the magic happen?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So, it oftentimes you see it um in pipeline reviews and forecasting. Honestly, you see a lot of that. So if you're trying to, so if there's a belief issue, for example, right, you start to see things like you can feel it in the room, whether you're on a Zoom or you're in the room with them, you can start to feel it. Like pipeline may look full, but deal velocity, right, starts to slow, right? Close rates dip, and then, forecasts feel a lot like wish lists than commitments.
Mm.
That's where you can start to see that. I mean, in conversations, you'll hear a lot of hesitation. Oftentimes, like you hear the product can't do that. Right? You hear things like that when there's a belief issue, or customers don't get it. That's the other one I love. The customer just doesn't get it. They can't connect the dots between the product and how we solve that problem. And so that isn't that's not objection handling. That's a confidence problem, right? Um, but I also look for consistency, right? So if you've got 10 reps giving me 10 different versions of the value, that's a big red flag, right?
Hmm.
Lack of belief usually shows up in lack of alignment. So those are that's where you start to see the lack of alignment. So hearing that, you know what areas to pinpoint, right? And it goes back to what I said is, do we identify ICP and things like that the same? But I guess the first step is really, telling the truth, right? As a leader, you can't spin. You've got to be able to tell the truth. I know you know, um, that's a incredibly simple thing to do, but it's critical. Like people can feel whether or not you're authentic. And you can't spin. You can't spin reality. Just be honest with them. Get brutally honest about where we are. If there are product limitations, talk about them, right? If there are pricing challenges, talk about them. If there's process friction, talk about that. Just be honest. I think that's the first, you know, first thing to do when you're rebuilding confidence. And then, try to create quick wins, right? So when reps even close a handful of small, insignificant deals, with the right ICP, right? Use that as momentum, because that momentum starts to breed
Hmm.
confidence and public with that stuff. Um, yeah, case studies, logos, testimonials, use all that to start building out the collateral, and even get a real customer on the call with your revenue team and talk about how this solution solved their pain. Like, don't, it's not only your word, it use a customer, even if it's a small win, to say, yeah, this solution that, you know, uh, Jane sold us is helping us by doing this, this, and this, and that'll help. That's almost like an
Yeah.
internal pep talk from the customer. And then, I guess on a more practical level, just make sure you're investing in things like enablement, right? Enablement's really critical. Um, Simplify the story, sharpen the demo flows, give reps tools, the tools they need to make them feel like they're out there and they're winning. Um, Make sure they know the product inside out, and then from there, I think belief will naturally follow. And
Yeah, I
and
was about to sorry, I was about to comment like maybe broader enablement, like the ops. You talk about like we talked about the silos, we talked about the metrics, we talk about like being honest. I find that like the best go-to-market teams have really good ops teams that sort of keep them honest, circulate the data as is. You can spin it, and they are not like there to spin it, but just to like listen to the data and then try to identify potential problems. And they are very credible as partners in enablement, for sure. They can help a lot, but also generally, like, as trusted partners to the CRO, not talking with them or, like as they were like inferior components of like the conversation, but like important people at the table.
yeah, I'll say this too, and this might be a little controversial for some of the people listening, but I think the best operations people, the best enablement people think, they look at like the revenue team, like the salespeople, for example, as their customers.
Hmm.
And so they're naturally curious. And then they think about the customer's customer, which to me is always next level thinking, right? And
Yeah.
so who's the salesperson's customer? Well, it's the company's customer. And so they're not only listening to the customer, the salesperson, but they're obviously listening to the customer. What that helps avoid is what I call theoretical over-engineering of process. Theoretical over-engineering of process creates friction. It creates friction when the whole idea behind creating process is to eliminate it. But if you're not really listening to your customers and your customer's customer, whether you're an operations person inside or whether you're a marketing person, right? Focusing on the customers in the market, you're gonna create theory and the theory, and then you're gonna start to create processes that are based on theory and not reality. And that's where you start to get, and I think some CROs are starting to see a little bit, over-engineered processes, over-engineered buyer journeys, over-engineered sales process, over-engineered forecasting and that creates friction when the very purpose of designing those systems in the first place is to remove friction.
Yeah. Simplicity always wins. I mean, like you talked earlier, I don't know if we were already recording or not, but like the chaos now that exists in this like go-to-market systems. And like, I agree with you that like a lot of the stuff that we see at ScaleStack for customers is like over-engineering, like, things that are clearly too complex. And like for maybe an output, an ROI is like minuscule. It's like, why are we doing this? I mean, like you should challenge what you're doing
Yeah,
constantly. But, and I
right.
think that like, it goes along with that thought about like, if you have a good, strong ops team, things are not perfect. They will never be perfect, but like, you have a strong partner that can help you with your customers, which are the company's customers.
Yeah.
And
Right. Yeah. Like, the 15-step sales process is probably pretty over-engineered, right? You know, no one needs a 15-step sales process.
very cool. I read today like an interesting post on this on like the like how each component of the sales process is part of the whole. And this is Dave Kellogg, which is a guy that I admire and like as an advisor. SDR sell the meeting, SEs sell the product, and AEs sell the process. And I thought it was an interesting way of framing like how people contribute to this, because I mean like to the end customer, like everybody's selling something, but not everybody's selling the product. And so I like that and I mean, this resonated with me. I mean, we sell to enterprise customers, and like the role of the AE is really much like, managing the process really well and, asking those questions, understand, like process them, making sure that they circulate those insights inside of all the people that are working on the deal. But um, I thought it was an interesting way of framing. In your experience, like when you work with customers, how do you advise them to use like SDRs? If you advise them to use SDRs or SEs or AEs, like, maybe like some of the ratio that you want to see there, like what do you typically tell your customers that they should operate on?
Oh, so I agree with, we'll call it Fordism for GTM, right? Like everyone's got a part to put on the car. I mean, I get that. I think from an operational efficiency standpoint, I think it's important. I do think that regardless of where you sit in that, you've got to understand the whole process, right? You've got to
Mm,
understand how the parts fit together. If you don't
I love
understand the
that.
whole, it's really difficult for you to fathom why people act and do and motivated the way that they are. Um, and so, yeah, I think you've really gotta make sure everyone understands the
The
entire
whole.
process, right? And of course, where they fit into it and why that's important, but understanding the whole process is key.
It's
I
a
think
great
sometimes,
point. I
yeah,
love it. I don't think it's controversial though. I've actually had like to push my co-founder who owns like, product and tech. Hey, sometimes like even the engineers should come to customer calls
yeah,
or
yeah,
product, because if they are building without like the context, I mean, who are we building this car, like you said,
yeah,
for?
yeah,
I'm not just building any car. I'm building a specific car, a specific model of the car for a
yeah.
specific customer.
Yeah. Yeah, it's key. And one of the questions that I used to ask when I was looking at different CRO roles at different companies is talk to me a little bit about the feedback loop between product, the internal team, the revenue team, and the customers. And how many times how often does product go on a customer call? Because I think to your point, right? If you're inventing things with an inside out perspective versus an outside in perspective, you might be making some really cool stuff, but if it doesn't help the customer, if it doesn't solve the
Nobody cares.
problem, then
Yeah,
no one cares. No one cares. So I think that's a good point. And you need those feedback in place, and not just once. I mean, there needs to be a regular cadence where that's happening all the time. Again, GTM to me is like an organism. It's dynamic, it changes. It's not a set it and forget it, just like product that evolves over time. GTM will evolve over time. Like product market fit evolves over time. As soon as you bring a new product or you move from a single product to a platform,
yeah.
do you
Your
have
ICP
product
is
market
changed.
fit?
Yeah,
Right. And so you have to go back. You constantly, it's a circle, right? It's not this linear journey. It's a circle. And GTM's no different. It's a circle, and you need to revisit these things constantly in order to really understand what's happening in the market, understand what's happening internally.
absolutely. And speaking of the evolution of go-to-market, like, I'm starting to see, I mean, we're building on AI and like, obviously this is top of mind for everybody, but I'm starting to see in a lot of go-to-market orgs, like Gen AI type of titles, no? So like Gen AI, like solution engineer or like sales strategy, AI applied. In your experience, and I'm curious about the practicality of this. So like, where have you seen like AI applied well so far? Because I mean, there was this big MIT study, like maybe like back in August, like that said like, oh, 95% of the investments in AI at enterprise level are failing. And I wrote a post about it because if you dig deeper, like that's not really the reality, but it made some specific points. And so I'm curious, in your experience with customers, where have you seen success
Yeah,
in
I
AI?
will say this. I mean, in my experience, a lot of companies are still out there researching it. Like there's still a lot of companies out there that are sort of, they're poking it a little bit and still, they haven't really implemented it yet. I think the vast majority of companies are. I think, there are certain sectors like tech that are ahead of the game. But when it comes to AI and GTM, where I've seen it work is like, I've definitely seen it work. The ultimate, look, and it all depends on like, why are we implementing AI in the first place, right? So you need to start there. Where I've seen it work is a guy like Kyle Norton, right? He talked a little bit about this. Um, he talked about we wanted to free up the reps' time so they spent more time in front of customers selling. So what it meant was, and where it's working for, people like Kyle and others, is those back office processes, right? Like entering information into the CRM. And so they've started, implementing AI. They've now taken some of that off of the rep, off their plate. Um, and so those are, those are the things like that I've seen work well. Um, but again, if you don't have clean data, for example, that's an issue, right? You're just then you're it's the old saying was garbage in, garbage out. It's the same thing. You're going to be creating processes with bad data, which is going to give you bad results. And so for me, getting that data cleaned up first is really critical. And then, you know, and I think you should always, if you're launching an AI program, the ones I've seen launch best are actually they have someone that's in charge of, but then they're also talking to people. Like people are using AI a lot. Like reps are out there using AI on their own
Yeah,
and figuring out how are you using AI individually, not as a company, but how are you using AI
as an
individually?
individual contributor. Yeah.
Yeah, as an individual contributor. And then so figuring, and that helps you, you know, level set where people are in terms of their comfort level with it. And then you can start to think about how you're going to implement AI at a company level. But to answer your question, Elio, I mean, I've seen it by taking away a lot of the administration, like entering information into
Yeah.
Salesforce. That's a big one. And the idea there, again, you've got to start with what are we trying to accomplish here? And I like the way Kyle Norton talks about it because he always starts this conversation by saying, this is what we wanted to achieve. We wanted to free up 70 or 80%, I believe he said, of the reps' time
Yeah.
to be in front of sellers, which is incredible because most reps right now spend an average of like 30 to 35% of their entire week actually selling.
Speaking broadly about AI, so like we talked about like some of the specific, focus on the back office and on importance of like getting the data right. People are trying to make predictions. We have seen a number of technology waves transforming the way like we do business. What is something that like you think we can learn from those past cycles that it's applicable to AI? I don't know, the mobile wave, the cloud wave, the like, even the internet. What is that you think can be applied and say, okay, I can predict this about
Yeah.
AI?
Well, yeah, and I always look at this from a philosophical standpoint. So it's I think technology should enable and not always replace, right? At least when it comes to human interaction. So I think I don't think when it comes to selling or GTM, I don't think that the basics have changed. I think they'll always be the same. You know, customer's got a problem, you're trying to solve that problem. So how do I spend more time with the customer? How do I spend more time with more customers, understanding their needs and understanding how to fix some of the market, some of the problems that they're experiencing. And what I hope, what I would like to see AI do is allow people to spend more time developing those relationships, understanding those customer needs, and coming up with real solutions to those problems. And, insofar as AI or quite frankly, any other technology is concerned, if it doesn't do that, then I don't really see much place for it. Being through some of those big technological developments is that you've always got to focus on the same thing, and that is, do I understand my customer's problem and how to solve it? And so I think any technology needs to be focused on that.
Very good. Remy, this was great. If you were to go back in time to your younger self, what
Yeah.
piece of advice would you give younger Remy?
Uh, well, I would say to the individual contributor that is being promoted or has a promotion on the table, I would say think about why you want that new role, because being a leader and being an individual contributor are very, very different roles. And I think sometimes the promotion that you don't take is the best promotion you can get. I became a leader too quickly and realized that I still had a lot of individual records and I had a big ego that needed to be fulfilled. And so I ended up going back to an individual contributor role for another 5 years after I ditched that first leadership role because I wasn't ready. I would say don't try to outsell your team, outcoach them. That's the critical part. Like frontline managers should be spending at least 70% of their time coaching reps and not selling deals, right? And that's the big mind
It's a
shift.
big
Yeah,
transformation. Yes.
it's a big mind shift, right?
Yes.
So you're great at selling. Now you need to be great at coaching and leading, giving feedback, all that good stuff. And so that's a big mind shift. So yeah, don't always, make sure you're ready for that promotion. And sometimes the best one is the one you don't take. And then again, don't outsell your reps, out coach them.
Remy, this was great. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks,
I hope
Elliot.
you
Yeah,
enjoyed it
this
as
is
much
fun.
as I did. And thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thanks.